Hi, Kelsey. Can you hear me?
Send you the questionnaire for the child music right now. Yes.
Hello. Hi, Bruce. It's Kelsey. Are you logged on?
Yes, I'm logged on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, clear as a whistle. Yep. And I see that there are a few other people logged on.
Okay. Now, as a presenter, I've just noticed that I won't be able to watch the attendees. Now, if you see my screen, do you see the participants square on the side?
I do, and I can see that on my own as well. So I can manage any muting we need to do or questions. Yeah.
Okay, so better that I get rid of it, and there we go. Now, you hear the background noise in there. How bad is that?
I do. It's okay. We'll have to bear with you.
Okay. So maybe what I'll do, Kelsey, is for this one, I'll let you introduce and start things up. And just checking here right now. I'm just adjusting this so I can get, how's that for sound?
Sounds good. Also looks good.
No rustling or crackling or anything like that?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, good.
So it's based on the number of
okay. Well, it's 2 p.m. on the dot. I see that we have roughly 10 people, and I'm expecting about at least another 5 more. So maybe we'll just wait a minute more. Can everyone else on the phone hear us okay? I see Jacob's logged on, Amanda, Judy, Karen, Margie, Merlin, Ron, and Wendy. Okay. Some people are, Bruce, just messaging me for the dial-in number, so I'm going to provide that.
Okay.
You have it yet for the child mental health program. Exactly. You need to review the questionnaire.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. In order to
okay, well, 2 minutes after, can anyone on the line just confirm that they can hear us and can also, we can hear them?
So Bruce, I can hear you.
Okay, Amanda, Karen, great, thank you. Just a quiet bunch today. Thanks for confirming you can hear us. Okay, it's 2 minutes after, it's Friday afternoon. I just want to be respectful of time, so I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. I just wanted to remind everyone that this is being recorded, so please share that with your colleagues and as well for yourself. If there's parts of this that you want to go back and refer to, we will make the recording available to you. So we're here today to talk about and show you some of the tweaks. I don't even like to really say the word changes, tweaks that have been made to the Child and Youth Mental Health module as a result of consulting with Dr. Stan Kuchar, who is the specialist that has been advising us on on the key tools for the module. So thanks to Bruce for doing a tremendous amount of work with Dan to go through everything and review it. And further to that, we've also been working with Bill Upward, who is a consultant through the UBC Faculty of Medicine, and he is an expert on adult learning. And so Bill helped us work through all of the great content we have and had some great input into how we might be able to better package this for adult learners. So we have some exciting new options to share with you with regard to that. There is sort of the agenda, or how we're going to do this is Bruce will go through with you the sort of the learning outcomes and the goals. We will look at what some of the key changes are and see how that looks in the actual PowerPoint. And then at any time, please feel free to ask questions by either asking verbally on the phone, or you can type me a question here in the messenger function through the WebEx. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the process for EMR enabling the content for the Child Needs Mental Health module. Bruce, is that accurate? Does that summarize it?
Yep, that's great. Okay. Thanks, Kelsey.
Great, over to you.
Yep, thanks. So welcome everybody on a drizzly Friday afternoon. I just first have to let you know that I'm doing this from the South Terminal Airport, so there will be some background noise. So if there are announcements coming over, I'll just stop and you can listen to what flights are landing or departing and enjoy yourself from the comfort of wherever you're at right now. So I apologize for that, and we'll work through it as best we can. We, as Kelsey said, had worked with Bill Upward, and I also wanted to thank especially Ron and Aaron from Fraser that helped with input and building this and having long conversations about pros and cons. And also Kelsey's been really helpful as well. What we recognized when we were looking at child and youth mental health was that it's certainly one of the things that I've encountered as feedback from the presentations that I've done is that there's a lot of content in child and youth mental health. It's fairly new. It involves new workflows, and many physicians, it was the content itself, just the volume of content was quite overwhelming, even though it was good. And so to that end, we had some conversations about this and went back to PSP Central and Graham Taylor at the time to ask permission if we, for the first time, couldn't develop this module in a 4-learning session format with 3 action periods. Now, I don't want you to think that that means that must be the way that it's delivered. We recognize that people have successfully delivered the module in the past in 3 learning sessions and 2 action periods. What we just wanted to let you know is that there's an opportunity for you to have a choice depending on what works well for your teams, your audience, and your physician champions of doing a 3 or 4 learning session module with 2 or 3 action periods respectively. So this isn't meant to be prescriptive. This is offering you some variety and hope that it works out for you. What we'll do today is present the 4 learning session version and talk about what we've developed with learning outcomes and lesson plans, and show you the slide decks, as Kelsey had said, and then show you some background of what we've done to work with the EMR vendors to ensure that all this content, workflow, and resources are embedded in all the EMRs. So we'll show you just a little bit of the background with that. I'll pause a number of times for questions, and Kelsey can let me read off any that might have been written, and if there's no questions, I'm fine with silence, but I will give it a pause just to see if there's anyone there.
Bruce, sorry, it's Kelsey. Yep. Just wanted to mention to everyone, I've just realized that the default setting was that everyone was muted, so I've just going through and unmuting everyone, so people should now be able to ask questions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
So maybe I better pause at that point now that everybody's been allowed to speak, and just see if anyone has any questions at the outset before us starting, since you haven't had a chance to say even hi in the beginning. Okay, so if everybody's good with what we propose to do, let's go at it. So our goal is still as before, is to provide care for children and youth dealing with mild to moderate anxiety, depression, and ADHD, and provide that in the context of real GP time. Also to develop tools and methods of communication to encourage collaborative care with our other organizations such as Youth Mental Health Ministry and school counselors, as well as any other specialists and so forth. What we've redone the learning outcomes to reflect a more up-to-date approach to child and youth mental health, and that applies specifically to the past. Now, these learning outcomes are the things that we can build the measures or quality indicators on, and we'll touch on that a little bit at the end. Ideally, in an adult learning session, what you'd like to do is to have around 3 or 4 learning objectives in an adult learning session. And since we have 3.5-hour sessions, we have 4 3.5-hour sessions. We have 12 learning objectives or outcomes that we'd like to have. And as you can see, they're quite practical. Being able to use the EMR tools, especially focus on the algorithm and on the paper-based binder, as an answer to your question you may have about whether or not PSP Central will be providing the paper-based binders. At this time, as we've indicated in other webinars that we've had, PSP will not be providing the big white binders. The cost on them, I believe, Kelsey, is somewhere around $175 each, and we feel that now that 92% of clinicians are on EMRs and have computers, that it's timely to start encouraging them to use electronics for help with delivery of this product. I'll pause while I wait for the announcement to finish. So, sorry about that. I wouldn't want to be going to trail today. Fortunately, I'm going up the Powell River, so we won't be delayed. Now, also, we recognize that being able to apply the screening and assessment tools is key. Focusing on non-pharmacological interventions as an early approach to dealing with child and youth mental health issues, and really focusing on identifying listening and hearing as valid treatment options. Now, those first 4 learning objectives are the ones that we felt that were key to focus on in the first learning session, and we'll describe that and show that to you in a little more detail. And again, things like building registries, recognizing that physicians don't see a lot of most physicians don't see a lot of child and youth mental health issues in their practices, and so developing a registry is sometimes challenging to them, and they can question you about that. If anyone is needing a handout that describes why registries are of some use, I have that, and you can contact Kelsey, and I can certainly provide that for you. It gives some points of, here's the usefulness of having a registry. The confidence in prescribing management and for the different conditions and prescribing medication, as well as working on a working relationship with the child and youth mental health team is quite key. So that's the learning objectives or outcomes that we hope Now, there are some key messages that we've included for you to use and highlight and emphasize. And they haven't changed. The child and youth mental health issues are under-identified or identified too late, and it's key to have early identification so that children can receive treatment, and that recognition that while most of the child and youth mental health issues present in family practice, this is to encourage people also to say, not only can you identify, but you can manage a lot of the mild to moderate cases. So take your time in the assessment, really focusing and emphasizing on listening and hearing. This is something that we're doing now with all the modules, is really encouraging even to have some listening and hearing exercises. And if anybody's interested in a exercise that can be done that's kind of fun as an icebreaker, I've got a really good one for you. And certainly, again, through Kelsey, if you let her know that, she can provide you the information. I can pass it on to her. And I think key here is when we talk about not overwhelming physicians, that the problems may be chronic, they're not fixable. Their non-pharmacological treatment is, and management is the foundation. Physicians don't have to do it on their own, and a team-based care works better than anything. So what we did as we built the instructional plan for the Child and Youth Mental Health Implementation Program was to take each of the learning outcomes, describe how you might assess that outcome, look at what measures might be done and how you might measure them, how you can teach them, and what resources are needed to teach each outcome. So while we've provided a lesson plan and an agenda as well as a slide deck, we're not trying to be prescriptive. If you have ways that you've used or that you find to teach an outcome or to measure, or different resources that work with teaching something new, different audience participation activities that work well, we'd love to know about it. And the idea would be we'd build a library of how to teach and resources needed and provide it to everybody to share. So this is, again, not prescriptive, but something that we can start out on and build on. So you can see for each of the learning outcomes, the 12, each have the outcome, the different how to assess, how to teach, and resources needed. And you can see as we move through there, each outcome has that all broken down for you in a general format. Some of the things are didactic, some of the things are working in collaborative groups in the action period, and some of them are actually in group discussions or other activities during the session. One of the things that Bill Upward was key about that we tend to not pay enough attention to as a principle of effective adult education is that he constantly reminds me, and I keep thinking about this as I'm doing any session, that the ideal adult learning session not only involves some knowledge transfer in the form of didactic, but also group interactive and working exercises where people actually work together collaboratively to come up with solutions as part of the learning process. And the ideal split, he says, for that is 40%, no more than 40% didactic and 60% group activities. Ideally, the best is a small group learning session, 6 to 8, 12 people, and is done in a very safe and collaborative environment. Now we know with these learning sessions to have just 12 people or have as many as 8 for some in rural areas isn't as possible or isn't as likely. So being able to break your larger group down into smaller table groups for table activities and having enough facilitators to help work with that is quite key. So what we've done from there is broken all those outcomes and activities into the learning sessions and action periods. So we've identified which learning objectives are targeted in each of the learning sessions. And you'll see that we actually target, there's an overlap between learning objectives in different learning sessions, so that there's more than 3 to 4 that I mentioned because of the overlap, and B, as I mentioned, overlap. We've also put learning objectives that are targeted in the action period as well. Now, again, something that's a little different than the way we've approached this before. One of the key things around adult learning techniques is that, I will pause for a second. That even though we list 3 or in the learning session or the action period 2 or 5 outcomes, we really want to go to where the adult learner is and work with them on the things that they are able to achieve. I was at a learning session last night, LS2 for MSK, and one of the presenters asked the audience how many of them had actually done the items in the action period, and I'm sure all of you are nodding your heads and going, yep. And there was only about, I'd say, 1/3 of the hands that actually went up in the audience. And the presenter at that point didn't harangue the audience, but really tried to emphasize the importance of doing the action items. And one of the comments we made to the crowd was as well, wherever you're at, that's okay. And using the principles of brief action planning and motivational interviewing was key in being able to say to them, you know, you may not have gotten to the point that you plan to do with your goals and your learning objectives. That's okay. This is new. There's a lot to it. You're busy. This happens. And how might you like to modify what your learning objectives are? So you heard all the things there that come from brief action planning and motivational interviewing techniques that we teach doctors to use on patients, and I encourage you to use on doctors as well in your action period planning and follow up with them. So learning session 1, really, I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions, anything about the 3 or 4 learning sessions and the approach that we have so far to working with the audience and the general outline with what we're trying to do. Okay, I haven't heard any questions. Kelsey?
Yeah, either have I, and there's nothing typed in, and everyone is unmuted, so.
Okay, that's great, no problem.
No, okay.
No questions means we're doing a good job explaining things. Now, one of the things that we realized from the first learning session in the 3 learning session module was that, I'll pause a second. In the first learning session, the focus was on giving the overview, the context, introducing to screening tools and the algorithm, and also starting a more deeper dive into anxiety. What we're proposing is to take it a little bit slower in the first session and really just work on the introduction, the context, the screening tools, give just a general introduction to the CAD-6, the SCARED, and the SNAP, but not dive deep in any of those things. Instead, more focused on the non-pharmacological interventions. There's listening and hearing as valid treatment options, and starting to develop a collaborative working relationship. So there's no specific focus in the first learning session on anxiety as there was before. And some people did other specific topics in the past. Now, this doesn't mean that a physician can't dive more deeply by his or herself and dive into the different tools. I'll pause for a second. Sorry about that. It's the best that we could do in this situation. If I was going to be able to fly home tonight, I had to do this from the airport, and there's no quieter place to do it from. So what we also did is broke things down a little bit more into the learning session. So the actual activities laid out in front of you, and the PDSA action period 1 items, and learning session 2 activities, and action period 2 PDSA cycle. So these are all suggestions that people can follow. Now, some people may question why we don't see any currency here. And by currency, I mean in the past we've said use screening tools on 4 patients, trial listening and hearing techniques on 7 patients, and so forth. So anything where we're actually applying a number and expectation. Sorry, it's not usually so noisy here, but it's busy today. So with the currency or target, again, that is not in the spirit of motivational interviewing or brief action planning to actually set hard targets. So what we prefer instead is to see people try things that they have confidence in. And again, you're hearing language from brief action planning. I think that's the purpose on this, rather than to set hard targets and hard goals. You can see that we're doing, oh, my apologies. When I look back, when we look at the learning session 2, this is where we're starting to introduce anxiety and depression, and diving more deeply on that. And the reason that the 2 things together is that they're very similar in the tools that they use for management, both the medications and the CBT tools. So we put them together in one learning session. And by the time we get to learning session 3 is when we're diving deeply, more deeply into ADHD. The 4th learning session is used as the 3rd learning session was in the old module, to start really fine-tuning, integrating the tools, discussing effective workflows, and working on the collaborative process. The whole key to this, and the reason to add that 4th learning session, is to provide a 3rd action period where we can focus on the ADHD, whereas the 2nd action period really focused on the anxiety and depression specific tools. So I'll pause there. Just any questions about the learning sessions and how we've structured them. Again, the intent isn't to say that anxiety and depression must be done in learning session 2 and ADHD in learning session 3. That's adjustable and flexible for you. It was felt that it was probably most appropriate to deal with things that were of most significance in a general practice, and the things that physicians would want to pay most attention to, especially around depression and suicidal ideation, asking questions about suicide intent and dealing with suicidality. So we broke it down again from there. into an actual lesson plan for each learning session. The first learning session, the 5 learning objectives are listed, and the learning session activities are listed with a delivery format opposite. So we have the introduction, physician perspective. It's done by storytelling, team roles and collaboration, facilitated discussion, and so forth. Where we've listed small group activities and activity debriefs, we've listed those specific tools up earlier on, and this is where your input as to what's worked and what things you've tried and seen effective with your audiences, having that feedback come back to the PSP Center will be very valuable. You'll notice, oh, excuse me, I'm busy on a teleconference.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. You'll notice that we didn't put the times in the learning session down here, and we've left that to you to decide how much time should be given to each of the different learning session activities, as long as we're aiming for that total of 210 minutes or 3.5 hours. So we felt that it was better to leave that to you to work out and decide where your breaks are, and if necessary, even to shift things around a little bit as suits your position. As mentioned, the strategy for Learning Session 2 is now to start again with bringing back people to talk about how things went, introducing some cases, starting to dive more deeply into the anxiety or depression, a real deeper dive into the tools that are used for that. So while in your Learning Session 1, the SCARED and CAD tools were introduced, as was the SNAP-4, now we actually go into it and start talking about, what the numbers mean. When in SCARED, if you have a value that's over 25, talking about that the parent score is likely to be lower than the child score, so forth. The deeper dive is where it's key. Now, as you can see when looking over the delivery format, there's a lot of didactic in this one, so this isn't ideal. We've tried to put in some paired activity and some group work, but love to have your feedback over time and as you do delivery as to how you can develop a 60-40 split and or 40% didactic and 60% participatory to see how we might strengthen this in adult learning principles. I know that CGI is something that's a bit contentious from people, and originally when we did the module, what Dr. Kuchar had said was that CGI was the only validated scale that we had that could test for improvement or worsening of the condition, that the CAD, SCARED, and SNAP-4 were not built as tools to actually monitor progress. In other words, the runtime in them wasn't validated, that they were just to be used for identification and help with diagnosis. Since then, we've spoken with him, and he's been aware that people are using tools like CAD, SCARED, and SNAP-4, and he's comfortable with people doing that and working on validation of how those scores changing over time show whether or not, or are validated, showing that there's improvement or deterioration in a child or youth condition. In Learning Session 3, we move on and start diving into ADHD and looking at the medication treatment, what other tools are available, working with the child and youth mental health team. As you see, this working with the team and doing collaborative care is something that's key at each learning session. And I think more than almost any other module, that's just such an important part. And certainly something that in many communities right now, you have a child and youth mental health collaborative, that there's a lot of effort being put into that. So in ADHD, we're looking at the screening tools, identifying children with ADHD, going back over the 4 initial questions, how the SNAP-4 can be used, using the CGI to show improvement, and the management of ADHD, including both the non-pharmacological and pharmacological management. And then finally, in learning session 4, as we mentioned before, it's about integrating everything they've learned, working on relationships. This is a place where there's time to start bringing in more focused topics that the audience might like to be interested in. We have interest from groups looking at cultural sensitivity, looking at substance use, and I'm sure many other of the regions have had other topics introduced that are that take off from child and youth mental health and dive more deeply into something that the audience might be interested in. So that's a fairly light session, leaving time to be able to do that, and also to have that report back period. Hopefully over the course now of 4 learning sessions, the people in the audience have had time to have had enough patience to be able to report back on things that have been effective, lessons learned in their own practices. So I'll pause there, and not necessarily questions, if there are any, that would be great, but also thoughts on what you've heard, whether you like the idea of going to 4 learning sessions and how it's been broken down and whether that's effective for you or might be effective for the audiences, and any other thoughts that you might have that we might like or not like to hear would be appreciated.
Bruce, it's Kelsey, and I just wanted to add, just maybe to stimulate some ideas. One of the things that came up on, Bruce and I ran this webinar on Wednesday, just the same webinar, and one of the suggestions, which I thought was really good, was that, would we be able to bring together a similar sort of webinar or call with GP champions that would be thinking about, delivering this in a sort of a 4-session model going forward. So that was mentioned and noted, and we will be looking to do that in the spring for sure.
Hi, it's Joe. I'm wondering, is it from VCH? Are we going to this model, or is there still going to be an option of a 3-session model versus a 4-session model? And I missed the beginning. Is there an action period 3 payment for completion?
Yes. So the answer to those questions, Joe, yes, that was one thing that we addressed right at the beginning, that yes, there is the option to do either the 3- or 4-session model, depending on the team, the presenter, and the audience. So you may have a very advanced audience who doesn't need to have as much general detail, that you may want to go a bit quicker, or a presenter who doesn't have the time, or the team that doesn't have the capacity. And yes, we've had approval for payment of the 3rd action period and participation in and attendance at the 4th learning session.
Thank you.
Is there anybody out there of any of the RST's coordinator who have taught the or facilitated the child and youth mental health module before?
Gurpreet Randhawa here. I have facilitated, now we're going into our 3rd cohort. Sorry, my 3rd time supporting. Okay. Yeah.
So Gurpreet, how does this strike you, and from what you've heard before in your previous 2, as to the amount of content and whether or not 4 learning sessions might be well received or not? I'm curious.
Mm-hmm. I think from the extra time that physicians would have to do the action period, reaction period work, that would be quite favorable because that's one of the biggest struggles is finding the right patients or patients not coming in, the child and youth, to be able to do the AP work. So from that perspective, I think this would provide more opportunity, plus the chance to really, the collaboration and networking is a huge part of this module. So I think that this additional time to work closer together would be really received quite well.
Okay. So beneficial from the point not only of the time to do action period, but time to have to collaborate. So that's good. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else out there who's actually been involved in child and youth mental health collaborative module delivery?
Hi, it's Joe. We just finished one in Whistler, and we're planning one in Squamish at the moment. And I think that extra time would be good for, especially the resource component. We find that there's a lot of dialogue that gets created among the resources, and a lot of the resources kind of almost wait till session 3 for that to take place. But by the time you've recapped the whole module and then also met the needs, say maybe some unmet needs that we've heard along the way, like Whistler wanted more focus on CBT, so we brought that into session 3. It allowed for less time for the resource panel or the speed dating with the resources or whatever activity. So I do think that definitely, especially with child and youth, there's so many different resources that maybe the extra time would be helpful that way.
So Joe, are you going to plan to do, might you plan to do a 4 learning session module for Squamish?
No, because we've already set our dates, and it's one thing about the 4 sessions is trying to get people to commit to 4 dates, and especially our facilitators as well, you know, because their schedules are crazy. So potentially going forward in the future, yeah, but we've already sort of set Squamish in motion, so I wouldn't try and get participants to commit to another date.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else out there that's been involved in a delivery before? Okay. So what I wanted to do now was to actually take a look at the a couple things. First is just to show you some changes in the algorithm, and then actually look at the slides, and so you get an idea of how the flow looks. You'll see this is an updated version of the algorithm. There was a request to make the algorithm less busy, so we took out the boxes that had the first 3 visits, since they were really the same, and made a title at the top that was visits 1 through 3. The version of the algorithm that you're seeing right now is version 7.2. This is listed as 7.1, so that's my mistake with the date down here, and I will fix that writing, but you will see on each version, future version of any algorithm, that there will be the version number and the date down at the bottom. So if you see a date that's fairly old, you might check with Kelsey or someone at PSP Central, or check on the website to see if there's a more updated version. This has been simplified so that, as I said, there's just the 1 visit, and the tools and resources have been sort of a little bit more magnified, so that each of the tools is available by clicking on it directly, including things like the side effect screen, the CBT skills, the new referral form that's called Confident Parents, Thriving Kids. It's not Strongest Parents anymore, and race information contacts. You can still go directly to any of the conditions where resources or different tools specific to that condition are all available by clicking on them. This is nothing new for you folks, but that front page has been changed slightly and better access to each of the tools. Any thoughts or comments? Are people happy that it's been made a little bit simpler?
Hi, Bruce, it's Joe. Actually, I wanted to mention, when you're teaching new people about it, they don't understand a lot of the acronyms, so TIFA and CIFA and CBIS and CBT. they were, what does that mean, and why is it an acronym? So I got those kind of questions.
Okay.
So that was one comment, and then in actually teaching it to find some of these.
You go ahead, Joe.
Okay, to find some of the psychotherapeutic support, there's so many different avenues that in actually teaching it in the practice visits, we developed this thing called an algo map that helped us kind of show everybody what's behind it. Because people were stuck they didn't know where to find certain things, and then we would get stuck trying to find other things, especially a lot of the handouts. There's so many different handouts from Anxiety BC, or there's so many different ones in there. So in order to teach it, we had to kind of create our own map to find it ourselves, so that we didn't look like we didn't know where to find things. So happy to share that. We actually used that in session 2 so that people could navigate the algorithm with cases, and if they saw something on the algo map, a handout in the algo map that they thought they'd like, then they can kind of find exactly on the front of the algorithm what button they have to push in order to get there.
Thanks very much, Joe. So 2 takeaways from that. One, I will expand the language there from TEFA to Teen Functional Assessment, Child Functional Assessment. And I can't expand the CBT skills, but I might just change it to CBT skills, as most physicians would know what CBT is. So those are good points, and definitely sharing that algorithm map, the algo map as you call it, would be quite wonderful. So if you send it to Kelsey, we'll make sure that it's a common resource available to everybody. Thank you very much.
Will do.
So those were great comments. Any other comments from anybody?
Hi, Jacob from Fraser.
Hi, Jacob. Yep.
Hey, how you doing? I just had a question about this talk about sharing the resources. I think it's a really, really, really good idea. We've developed a lot of things sort of in isolation here, and it would be great to share them out, and would love to see what other people have done. I just had some questions around how that was going to be organized, and is that going to be sort of a central repository, a database, or how are you thinking of doing that?
So the plan is that on the PSP site, there will be some different ways of accessing the information. First, there'll be an area that these kind of tools, like the Child and Youth Mental Health Algorithm, the slide decks, and those kinds of things, are available to everybody. And the thought then is that there will be an RSP-specific section that will have those teaching, facilitating, delivery, tools, tips, tricks, extra resources that you might use as part of delivery, implementation, evaluation that could be stored and accessed. So Kelsey, and also there might be some areas, whether or not we make areas that are region specific. So I know I get requests from different regions to add in material, say a referral form that's specific to Northern Health, or something that's specific to Interior Health. That's where those would live as well. So they wouldn't confuse the general site.
That's correct. It's Kelsey. Yeah, I'll just add to that. So most of you are probably aware we've just launched a new website, and so that was phase 1. Phase 2, we understand that there's going to be probably more functionality that lends to document management and content management. So we're just in the process of sort of wrapping our heads around that and determining, what can be facilitated through the website. So as Bruce said, all those ideas have been expressed, and working towards probably having easier mechanisms for you guys to both get information and share information via the website, and also just be driving that back to physicians you're working with, so that the website becomes sort of this central hub for all of the PSP information.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. Is there any sense of sort of a timetable? Is this sort of 6 months away, a year away, a month away?
I would say 3 to 6 months is realistic, yeah.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. So thanks for that feedback. And if everybody's good with that, we'll move on. So what we would like to do next is do a bit of a walkthrough, and I'm not going to do this in exhaustive detail, don't worry, of the slide deck, just so you get an idea of the flow and the content. It's difficult to see something in a lesson plan or learning plan, and different to see it on in an actual slide deck. There's mention, of course, about the facilitators and what the agenda is going to do, and the details about how we're working this. Kelsey, I just noticed something in here. This is still a 3 learning session model. We need to change that to a 4 learning session model.
Sure, that's slide 6.
Good.
Okay.
We talk about context, what's going on in BC, and what it is that we're actually trying to accomplish and what we're not trying to accomplish. I think the key thing, and for most physicians, there's no argument on this. There certainly is a little bit of a push from some areas on prescribing youth and children for ADHD. That's content and work and discussions that are in progress, and will be something that we'll address in future updates, which I'll address a little bit later about what's happening with future updates and give you a little bit of a glimpse of what's going on. How we're going to do this, and hopefully have a patient or a parent who's able to speak to it. We're talking about, why we're doing this. It's the classic, what are we doing, so what, about what we're doing, and then getting into the key nitty-gritty, then what. Here's the stuff that will help you with the things that we told you we're doing and why we're doing them. And so it's just looking into more detail about child and youth mental health in general. You'll see this many times in different ways, is to reassure family physicians that you have to know your limits. And just as families and child and youth have to know their limits, the physician has to know their limit as well. We're not asking people to become super expert child psychiatrists and be able to deal with everything in here. There's a touch on parenting overviews, developmental transitions, and how we deal with them, especially engaging the adults, the tips, and bringing into the conversation the issues surrounding past history of abuse and why we're asking those screening questions at the beginning to ask for previous history of mental health or emotional disorder or abuse. We talk in general about engaging the school to start setting up the conversation around why we're working collaboratively and why we've included all the people that are here at the table. And that leads right away into table discussions about collaboration and roles as an introduction and an icebreaker. And so instructions on doing that and then leading to a break. We do pay attention to the suicide risk assessment in the first learning session, as this is the emergency, and talking about cutting versus true suicidality, and being able to risk it or assess it in children. So talking about the assessment, why that it's really important, and the tools that we use, the basic tool, the CAD-6, and just being able to look at depression, and then diving into doing a suicidal risk assessment specific for the child or youth. Some other key points to remind people of about hopelessness, safety and contingency planning, and an actual tool that can be used as a safety card, noting that a contract is found by the evidence and studies not to be something that actually makes a difference, but having a safety card that has quick access to emergency numbers is quite key. I was talking with a physician this morning at a meeting, and he told us of how yesterday he was walking over the Canby Street Bridge and came on this brand new clean knapsack sitting in the middle of the bridge, just sitting all by itself. And he opened it up, took a look just to see like what's going on here. It had a bag of luncheon in it and some things, and sort of looked over the edge to see what was going on. Then was just going to be phoning the police to say, I've got this knapsack, there's nobody here with it, you know, what's going on, when the police sirens came and a water taxi pulled up below, and a very bedraggled young woman who was soaking wet was brought out of the water taxi and taken to an ambulance. So he had actually come upon the bridge where the knapsack was, where somebody had jumped, an older teen had jumped very shortly before he came to that point. And, you know, it just sort of emphasized to him how important it was that at that moment when she was in the middle of the bridge, having a number to call or somebody to have contact with would have been quite key. That was quite impactful for me when I heard that story. And then a little bit of a table discussion about suicide risk assessment. We delve a little bit into the framework on the tools. I think it's really quite key for people to understand the difference between the screening tools, those 4 questions, and the secondary tools, which are the ones that delve more deeply into depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and as well differentiating that from the treatment and management tools like the child functional assessment, the teen functional assessment, and the primary assessment tool, the clinical global impression scale. The algorithm is introduced. We now dive into the initial screening, talking about the mental health screening questions, parent history, historical factors, family history of suicide, and into the mental health screening questions specific. The 4 questions, the first addressing depression, and if the answer to that is yes, going to the specific screening tool, the CADS evaluation. Second question, looking at anxiety, and if yes, into the SCARED evaluation. Third question, if yes, going into the ADHD SNAP-4 evaluation. And then finally, the 4th question, which leads into the referral for assistance around behavioral problems, if the answer to that is yes. And next steps, what to do. So this describes what happens if there's a response that's caused for both depression and anxiety. What do you do? If there's a response that's positive for one or the other, what's the approach for the patient? We introduce, but don't go into detail on the SCARED assessment, the CAD-6, and the SNAP-4. The intent here is to say they exist, this is what they're used for, this is what they look like. But we will go into more detail on them when we're addressing the condition in more detail later on. Again, key in the first learning session is emphasizing the psychotherapeutic and non-specific interventions and how support is key. In the notes, which are complete in these, they talk about the approach and different points that are key, and what other non-specific interventions we're talking about, including some detail on sleep and some resources, Kelsey Mental Health resource that's really, really important. We talk about the referral flags, the things that are urgent, that we need to encourage them to contact other members of the team to help, especially if there's suicidal ideation, major depression, or delusions or hallucinations. And finally, some other resources that are available before we move into action planning. And the description of action planning and what we're doing, again, Kelsey, noticed this has got 3 learning sessions. We need to change it to 4 for this slide deck, slide 63. And the data collection sheet. We'll talk a little bit about this as how it relates to EMRs when we talk about the EMRs in a couple minutes. And then some action period requirements, the things that we'd like them to try. Basically, this is what you would describe more as a behavioral menu. Now, you do see that this does have currency in it. And again, that's something that's negotiable. That's not set in stone, so it's something that you can work with the physicians where they're at about what they feel confident in being able to try a test of change on in their practices. So behavioral menus, things to try, key resources, and then team. Now this is quite key. I mean, one of the things we talked about was the individual goals, but also look at, because we got more time here to work on some collaborative goals, you know, what the group might think that they might be able to do in their community. And again, keeping it simple tests of change. It may be just the realization that, or exchange of phone numbers or email addresses, that they work out a process to be able to talk to each other. Reassuring people again, and then into the things about support from PSP and the evaluation for the session. So that's learning session 1 in a nutshell. Any thoughts or questions on that? It's, you know, a fair amount of slides, 71, but as I remember learning session 1 from the first time I did it, we were up close to 100 slides or over 100 slides, which was a lot. So here we've got 71 slides. Again, we're not saying the slides are written in stone. If you want to modify them, change them, hide some of the verbiage and put it into the notes, you're welcome to it. Comments or thoughts?
Hi, Bruce. It's Ron. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ron.
Oh, hi. It's Ron from Interior Health. Just had a question. I stepped out for a little bit, but when I came back, I just noticed that you had red and yellow stars for some of the slides, and it's been a while since we've done the module here. I'm just wondering if that's, I know we had red stars, and that those were kind of the slides that you wanted kind of as mandatory slides that we should be showing. What does the yellow mean?
Yeah, the red stars are the mandatory. The yellow stars are, think seriously before you get rid of them. And if you do get rid of them, replace it with something that addresses the issues for referral and referral flags. So that's all that was about. The red stars were full stop. Don't get rid of this. This is what Dr. Kuchar said is immovable and should never be dropped.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Kelsey, any written questions?
No, Bruce, nothing. I've been taking notes, so I've got all your
Liz here from Charlotte. I do have a question. I'm new to this.
Hey, Liz.
Ideally, what is the length of the action period in between the learning sessions?
You know, Ron, you've done, how many of these have you done, Ron, the child and youth mental health ones that you've been involved in?
We just did the one here in Kamloops.
Oh, just the one, yeah.
Yes, but, you know, even talking to the colleagues around Interior Health, it's been usually, you know, 6 to 8 weeks is what we aim for. Sometimes it goes longer. It just depends sometimes on the facilitators and if we can get the learning session, you know, in that, you know, a decent amount of time in between. Sometimes it ends up going longer.
You know, we typically have about 2 months, 6 weeks if we can't get a, you know, secure dates longer than that, but usually about 2 months is or a bit more is good, because it depends on how big the cohort is or how far you have to travel to go to do your action period work.
And Gurpreet, how about you?
I would say about 2 months as well.
Yeah, it's challenging for. Yeah, it's challenging for some of these, not like adult mental health, where there's lots of patients, there has to be a long enough time that physicians get the chance to see somebody with some of these conditions. So I certainly like the idea that the 2-month gap is built into this. And certainly, as Joe mentioned, you know, being able to have 4 learning sessions allows potentially up to 8 months to really develop more contact with patients and also to develop that collaborative relationships.
One thing I wanted to add about the 4 is that you can build your resources in a lot nicer throughout all of the sessions instead of them typically waiting, you know, kind of sitting, observing, maybe commenting a little bit in the first 2, but really being key in the 3rd one. You can actually build them in so that they become more integrated into all the sessions a lot nicer because of the spread of the content.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So we're just going to take quick, now these get quicker with each one, just they get a little shorter. With learning session 2, again, as I mentioned, the focus is now specifically on anxiety and depression. There's still time built in for sharing, talking about roles and referrals. We revisit the mental health screening questions and identify those first 2 questions that are key to today's session, but also touch on the 3rd and 4th questions, reminding people that there is a flow to those sessions, to answering yes to those questions as well with tools that are available. We talk about the depression first, go into a little bit more detail on that first question, the key steps in dealing with major mood disorder, looking at the risk identification table, and just, you know, I think this is important, who to screen. Somebody had mentioned at one session that she was pleased to hear that when she went in to see her, this was talking actually with Pam Anata the other night, that when she went in to see her GP who had done the child and youth mental health module, now was asking her teenage daughters at each visit, how are things going? How are things for you? How are you feeling? And she never did that before. And she said that was really encouraging to see as a result of directly as a result of the child and youth mental health module. So as you remember from adult mental health, just asking the question first is such a key thing. And to hear that happening with a physician, if that's all they did, what a great way, what a great thing to hear that they've accomplished something there. The tool used, TAD 6, how to look at the tool and what to do with it, with the results. I'm going to pause for a second. So what? So one. So one of the things that we've identified is that being able to give physicians an idea of how the first 3 appointments might go and what you might do in those first 3 appointments was quite important. So in this case, here's how the first appointment might look. The second and third appointments, how long they might take. Now, one thing you've noticed here is what you'll see here is we stay away from the billing recommendations. Right now, the 120 and especially the 120, but less so the 14043, there has been some increased attention from the Patterns of Practice and Billing Integrity program, with auditors focusing in on family physician billing around some of these fee codes, and as relates to this, the 120 fee code. And so certainly one of the things that we don't want is for the practice support program RST coordinators to be in a position where they're having to give advice about billing that may end up being advice that isn't current or accurate, and that might get the physician into trouble, because ultimately, no matter where the advice came from or who actually did the billing, the physician is the one that's liable and responsible. So you'll see us avoiding that for now, and we're working with the SGP and with the GPSC, Kathy Clellan, through the billing incentives group, and Jean Clark and Tracy Moss through SGP on developing some standardized slide deck tools and training for presenters to be able to talk more in detail about billing. So I'd encourage you for now that as part of what we're doing in this, where we used to have a focus on a billing component, that we talk more about visits themselves and how the visits might go rather than the billing. And if there are questions about billing, rather than you trying to answer that, or the presenter, if they're not feeling expert about it, is to refer them to the SGP site. I feel sorry for people for trail. Doesn't sound good. So, it's a long announcement, so I'm going to continue on, and I'm sorry, try to hear best me over as you can. So focus in on, the structure of the visit rather than the billing of the visit is our recommendation. And you'll see this again and again and again, is to reassure physicians about not getting overwhelmed. More detail about major depression disorder and what happens if it stays high, and talking about suicidality. And another but compact one slide showing how 3 visits might go, what you can do in between visits, and what tools and resources you might use at each visit. We talk about other psychosocial interventions, tools such as the dealing with depression workbook for teens, which is the equivalent to the antidepressant workbook that is available for adults, and I believe PSP Central will still be supplying these workbooks, and Kelsey, maybe we can confirm that, but I believe these are something that we will be able to receive and distribute out to the team.
Yes.
This slide, number 22, we're going to relabel. This is no longer Strongest Families, and we'll get a better picture of the Confident Parents Thriving Children to describe it. So we're going to change that, and place for table discussion. We'll dive at this point into pharmacological treatments, just slightly just to mention that they're there, and also talk about psychosocial interventions. And again, we put that to reinforce that even if as part of medication therapy, we are going down the route of prescribing medication, we're still continuing on the psychosocial intervention as part of the toolkit that we'll use with children and youth. So we'll introduce, mention that about medication, but we'll get into the details of medications in a minute. The childhood and adolescent anxiety, focusing on question 2, talking about what the significance is of the score. We're going to change the format of this to match more closely to the format of the 3 visits with the depression visits, but the idea is the same. Visit 1, here's the tools you would use. Visit 2, visit 3. What to do when the score is at 25 or higher, using the teen functional assessment and psychotherapeutic support tools, and again, emphasizing the psychotherapy. We'll now dive into detail on the pharmacology, pharmacological management, really emphasizing that for anxiety and depression, don't rush. There are some specific antidepressants that have less concerns for side effects specifically than do others, and other strategies that are to be continued to use. So you can see this is a repeat of some of the things that we've mentioned before to really drive it in. Talk about the evidence around using antidepressants, the 12 steps for use of antidepressants, with some detail in the notes that you can see below, and then how to start. Start low, go slow, what dose to start on. All this is available in the algorithm as well. And then the side effect scale for following up on the antidepressant initiation and use. The key side effects to watch for, especially hypomania, which is more like of an irritability, agitation, suicidal ideation, and is a risk with antidepressants. So it's something to watch for, ask questions about, monitor for. These are the tools that you'd use and when you would use them. So in here you can see that the side effect scale is something that you would go home with the child and they would be using it at home with the parents, monitoring it and asking the questions and then bringing it in, and monitoring anxiety, which is quite similar. What to do after 8 weeks. Success, partial success, or little or no success. What the strategy would be with medication management. Talking about adherence to medication, how to check, 3 methods of checking, what to do if there's relapse, and then into action planning. I really encourage the use of teaching and using brief action planning with your physician audience. It's a great way of having them practice brief action planning and emphasizing that it's a tool that's useful at any stage in the game. And then finally at the very end, again, when in doubt, ask the experts. Any questions or comments about what you saw? Okay, so I'll just move on to the, I'm just going to move on to learning session 3. This is quicker. We're looking to focus on ADHD, a little quote, a little picture, somebody that is, to mention in this one that girls can have ADHD but may manifest differently, the common signs of ADHD, and I really like this one because it actually dives into a little bit more detail about some of the past facts and some of the risks that people don't generally associate with ADHD for academic performance, physical injury, traffic accidents. And Stan Kucher provided his school report card notes. And I liked especially the very last one there to say that this world-renowned expert is so disorganized he'll never be successful at anything. The third question that focuses on ADHD and where to go from there. There's an ADHD screening tool, both a youth version and a parent version of the tool, and then identification of risk for ADHD. Talking a little bit more about screening and diagnosis. The three subcategories, so ADHD is not one thing, it's many. It can be a number of things. And some of the identifying features that you might see in somebody that has ADHD at the different ages, 3 to 5, 6 to 12, 6 to 12, and 13 to 19. I think those are really valuable things and worth keeping in. That's my personal experience. People start thinking about their patients in a different way when they see that there's behaviors that might tweak them to think about that in a child. One key thing is asking about substance use. And again, you keep seeing this slide, reassuring physicians not to get overwhelmed. It's okay. Just take some time. Take your time in the diagnosis. Now, again, you may hear from some physicians, especially some that are more used to treating this, that there is more urgency around treatment of ADHD and that time is more of the essence. As I mentioned, this is something that we're exploring a little bit further as far as content, but Dr. Kuchar has indicated that at this point, take your time before you diagnose. He's seeing that there's more kids being labeled with ADHD and treated inappropriately who truly don't have ADHD but may have other behavioral issues that need to be dealt with rather than putting the child on a medication. So to that end, they're actually working on developing new tools that may be a little bit more specific, and we'll dive into those in a little bit. You go into the SNAP-4 as a tool, both a teacher and parent rating scale, what to do if the scores are high, what other tools can be used for ADHD. Again, the 3 visits for child and for youth, and other things that can be associated with ADHD, comorbidity, learning disorders, conduct disorders, and getting other team members involved is therefore very important. You dive into pharmacological treatment, baseline measurement, specific tests to order, some facts about the stimulants versus non-stimulants. There's a category of the ADHD medications that we call non-stimulants. That's Strattera. It's a trade name, amoxicillin, atomoxetine, and additional ADHD medications that people need to be aware of them, but if there was some thought to using any of these things, the specialist should be using those. What you might expect as results, talking about misuse, how to start in with the 2 different medications, methylphenidate and dextroamphetamine, and the atomoxetine, Strattera. How to switch from short to long-acting. Again, you may hear some controversy. There's some people that feel that we should go immediately to the long-acting. There are others that feel we should go immediately to the non-stimulant medications. And so you may hear some of this, and certainly the presenter should realize that referring to PSP Central to the content expert, to Stan Kuchar, who's very responsive to questions, is ultimately the best way to go to help answer any questions around the controversy around ADHD medications. Switching to atomoxetine, side effects and the side effect scale for following ADHD medications, monitoring ADHD medications, how long you treat for, and then we're into sustaining your gains and action planning for the next period. So essentially what we'll work through here is those first 3 action periods are where most of the content is, and in, this should be learning session 4. Working on the objectives and local resources and tying things together in the 4th learning session is the key. So sharing experiences, talking about the people that are involved and how it went, and things that we've tested. People diving in by learning session 4, we hope that they've made some small tests that change, that there's been some things that they've learned from the collaborative process, things they might be surprised by, and what they might consider doing next. We're looking for feedback, looking for reflections. Now, there is a billing section in here that we're going to take out that touched on the billing that we talked about before because we want to have some clarity from GPSD to some of these codes and how they're described and how they're taught. So you can see that those things are in there, but we're really moving along to collaboration and adding other foci in this fourth learning session where the audience might want to go. So a lot of it is just working on the systems and sustaining change. So in a nutshell, that's all the slide decks that we have that we were working through. Out of these slide decks, we developed some specific measures. You saw those before, but these are measures that we took. And again, you'll see some currency in there. I think you could ignore the currency for now, the targets and goals. This isn't something that is been released. It's just a draft in here. These are things that we're working on incorporating into all the EMRs. So literally at a push of a button, you will have the answer if the physician is recording these things properly. You will have an answer to all these measures in one sheet, in one place. The physician and the RST team coordinators can look at how things were going and decide where you want to go next. So those measures are available, and you can see a lot of it is around some very specific measures, both not only the process measures of, who's being tested and what screening tools are being used, but actually outcome measures as well, looking at improvement in care. Not all of the EMRs will be able to do this, but we felt that it was very important to be able to include this as a goal that we'd like to achieve with all EMRs, and ideally not only be able to look at their own practice, but compare to the aggregate of other practices so that they can use for comparison and get some idea where they stand in relation to others. So I'll pause there before we touch on what's coming to check and see if there's any questions. Okay, Kelsey, any written questions?
Sorry, Bruce. Nope, there's nothing written. Okay. We're good.
Okay. So as you've heard me mention several times in here, we recognize that what's key to the success of these modules is whether or not physicians actually start using some of the tools and resources and workflow in their practices. And in the past, we've provided binders, we've provided electronic algorithms, and now with the advent of EMRs and 92% of working physicians, we know that the EMR has to be considered as part of the workflow and how we embed all this material into an EMR. So just very quickly showing you some of the steps that we do, we've actually taken all the tools and resources and broken them down into the resource type. So you can see here for heart failure, there's the heart failure algorithm, all the different handouts, the different questionnaires, a physical exam, and identified what type of a resource or tool they are. In child and youth mental health and adult mental health, we just have a list of the different tools and resources. And we've taken that a little bit further in heart failure. Once we've done that and broken out to what is it we have as the content, the next step is actually saying, okay, we've got this as content, but we need to translate it into language that the technicians, the people that are actually building this into the EMRs can understand. So this now starts to get into things that are a little bit more complicated where we have to break down each of the tools. So in this case, we've broken down the child and youth screening questions into the 4 questions we've given them a name, we've said what they look like. So for example here, child and youth mental health screening questions is called a field type Boolean, which just means true or false. In other words, if somebody does the child and youth mental health screening questions and clicks on a field to say that they've done it, that value will be recorded, and the EMR will report back that the physician has used the child and youth mental health screening questions. You can break it down into a single choice from a list, and the list is yes or no, and it must be present in the EMR. And then there's a use case of how the physician would use this tool in the context of a visit and whether or not a printout or handout is necessary. We go into detail on each of these things, and you can see the breakdown in the questions and breaking it all out into how it translates for the technician to be able to put this together. So these are the things that are involved in embedding these tools and resources and workflow into an EMR. As well, the EMR vendors are given the algorithm to show how the workflow goes, what comes first, what's next. And actually, we did a presentation with the slide decks, went through them quite quickly and in a condensed form to give them an idea of what we're teaching and why we were teaching certain things. From that, the vendors will take all the material and embed it into the EMR so that it's available as a template available for the physician to be able to use, so that if they so chose, they could get access to everything, including the handouts, from the EMR rather than having to jump out to the algorithm or grab a binder. Challenging, it takes some time, but we're seeing some good progress from the vendors. And Kelsey, maybe can you give us an update where the vendors are at right now with child and youth templates?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So most of you would have seen by now the rough agenda for the training days coming up in February. So you will have presentations from, I believe, 4 of the vendors on their soon-to-be released child youth mental health and adult mental health templates. And I would expect that those will be going live and becoming available to physicians between, as early as this session up until about mid-March. We've asked each of the vendors to, in their presentation, provide their target release date and also some direction to you on how that will be available to their users. So is this a system template that anyone can simply search and find? Is it something that needs to be requested to the help desk? Those are the details that will be provided in the workshop sessions, and then we'll have also handouts available to all of you so that when you're going into clinics and preparing for learning sessions or whatnot, you'll be able to point the clinics in the right direction as far as getting the tools. So expect to hear more around concrete availability dates at the workshops. Some, in fact, are actually live and available now. We just haven't been necessarily promoting them simply because we've been waiting to provide you guys with a bit of an orientation and overview at the February workshops, and also just to point out that there will be subsequent webinars scheduled between sort of the latter part of February all the way until April that will focus in on the EMR tools specifically. So each of the vendors will be hosting those, quite similar to the pain management webinars that some of you might have participated in. Any questions about that? Okay.
Good, thanks, Kelsey. So what I just wanted to touch on now is what's coming, what's new. So when we're in the process of doing this, we were in contact with Dr. Kuchar, and he indicated that there were some issues. Certainly, some of the questionnaires, like the SCARED and the SNAP-4, were long. Physicians found them complicated to score, and there was some ambiguity around just what the results meant. Also, what they were finding is that with some of the tests, there was some overdiagnosis of some conditions, as I mentioned with ADHD, leading to an increase in prescribing some medications and sometimes inappropriately. So wanted to have some checklists and improvements to see if we could address those things. So Dr. Kuchar has developed some new tools that I'll show you that are currently in the process of being validated now through McMaster University. Just as a note, and Kelsey will tell you more, if you have any physician champions in your areas who are already using the older child and youth mental health tools, who might be interested in testing out some of the new tools and reporting back their findings on them, their efficacy, their accuracy, ease of use, let us know and we can connect you with the tools and connect up with the feedback mechanism. So there's a new ADH tool, quite nice. It's a one-pager that is simplified with fairly straightforward step A, step B. So anytime you put a check mark in the box very often in step 3, then you want to answer that question, does, in your opinion, this young patient show that characteristic clearly more than other young people I know, and check it. And it goes through all the different inattention items, hyperactivity, impulsivity items, and then a total. So it's a one-pager rather than anything more, and it breaks it into the inattention and then hyperactivity, impulsivity. With the page 2, that is the logic model around what do the answers mean. Well, so if you have a score of 6 or more in the inattention, yes, then that means inattention, and so forth in there. And some little corrections in there to help aid the answers. And there were some corrections that have to be made. Dr. Kuchar was aware and was going to approve those changes with just the scoring and the logic model. So that was the version for the clinician for evaluation of ADHD. There's a parent-teacher version, very similar. All the questions, separating onto 2 pages, the one with inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity, and no logic model to say what the score means. And then there's also an ADHD youth version, so the language is just slightly different. I don't often pay attention, and so forth. Again, trying to make it simpler for the youth, keeping it to 1 page. The new form for looking at youth worries and fears has a little preamble, and then again, 1 page of questions, 12 questions, and the logic model around what the scores mean. So very much simplified from the SCARED questionnaire. It also has a youth and parent version. And you can see again, 12 questions, totals, but no logic model. So the logic model, the logic model is available for the clinician's version only, not for the youth or parent version. And we'll get into more details on how those are taught and how we'll use those when we know more. Now, once there's been an assessment done and considering the possibility of a diagnosis, Dr. Kuchar has gone to the DSM-5 and has a checklist that the clinician should go through in order to validate that all the criteria have been met for that disorder being diagnosed or the child being labeled. So for generalized anxiety disorder, you can see that not only is the disorder or the symptom need to be clearly present, but also sustained in those boxes where both those choices are. And in those boxes where there's only the one choice, then you just have to have it present. A one-pager. For generalized anxiety, there's the same for a mood disorder checklist. It has to be clearly present and sustained. Down these last ones just has to be present. For the panic disorder, same idea. Seasonal affective disorder, social anxiety disorder. And those are the different ones that we have in there. There isn't one at this time for ADHD, and I was talking to Dr. Kuchar about that, and that may be something that we'll see in the future. So again, if you know of clinicians, or if you yourself are interested in having copies of these to look over, or know of clinicians that may want to try this, please contact Kelsey, and she can facilitate that for you. So I've covered all the different topics that we wanted to cover today. We have time for any comments and questions. It's Friday afternoon. I have time for it. The airport is quiet. So happy to have any questions or comments.
So it's Kelsey, it's a quiet bunch, which is kind of understandable. It's almost 4 o'clock on Friday. So Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this from the airport at that, which must have been distracting a little bit. I just wanted to say, I realize that sometimes, the questions and things like that might not come up until you're more, readily involved in either planning or rolling out this module. So, of course, we're always available for questions. Things already are posted to the website, but as Bruce noted, there will be just a few minor edits to PowerPoints and things like that, so please stay tuned for those. And also to extend, so as Bruce mentioned, the opportunity for any of your GP champions or early adopters of these child and youth mental health tools that would be keen to look at or try and practice the new versions that Dan Kuchar and his team have developed. That's actually being vetted right now through Queen's University, and they're just asking that anyone that wants to try them out would kindly provide some feedback to them. That's very helpful. There's already, my understanding is, quite a few clinicians around the country participating in that, but yet to have anyone from BC. So they're quite keen. If you have any GP champions or very keen physicians in any of your cohorts, we can, link them up with that information, as Bruce mentioned. So also just a reminder that we've recorded this session. The recording will be emailed out to you as well shortly, so that's always an option for you to go back and listen to the recording or take a closer look at the PowerPoints when you need them. So if there's no other questions, I will let us all go early, get 15 minutes back in our afternoon. Thanks again, Bruce, very much for taking the time.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Kelsey. Have a good weekend, everybody. Okay,
take care. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Kelsey.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.